Community colleges, she says, are the secret, best-kept secret in America in terms of our education system. And this is just one reason why. You help people take the next step in their lives to get the training and accreditation they need. We're able to expand on it during the Obama-Biden administration. We can't let this be delayed again. Denying access because a vet could not prove a direct connection if you're exposed to Agent Orange was wrong. It's to be presumed if the ailment you have is caused by your exposure to Agent Orange that you get treatment. We've got to seriously tackle the mental health crisis we have. A suicide epidemic is claiming far too many of our veterans and service members. You know, one of the saddest things when my son came home after a year in Iraq, he was back as Attorney General. The week before Christmas, he came over to the house and he said, "Dad, I don't know what I'm going to do." There was a Marine veteran who had been deployed a total of 6 times, if my memory is correct, who was in a relatively a modern, upscale neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood. And they get up in the morning and they get out, and I think it was a Dodge Ram, started down the street in front of his house, which was no sidewalks. Saw a woman walking her dog, ran over her, killed the dog, put her in the back of his pickup truck, took her down to I-95 right by where there was all the sand pile for emergencies. Molested her, put her back in the truck, came home, and called the state police and said, "I just killed someone." There was a voice in my head saying I had to kill someone. I had to kill someone, turned himself in. You know, the latest data suggests that almost 600 veterans as well are dying by suicide every year. Just here in Florida, 600 a year. It's devastating. There aren't any easy answers to this, but we can do so much better than we're doing now. We have an obligation to do so much better. We have to help our heroes understand that it's an honorable thing to do and takes strength to reach out and ask for help if they're suffering from unseen wounds. They're so accustomed to being asked not to ask for anything. We have to end the stigma surrounding mental health treatment. When they do reach out, when they call the crisis hotline, or walk into a VA hospital, or visit a VA center for counseling, we have to make sure, damn sure, that there's no one turns them away. No one tells them they have to wait. Part of it's also making sure the veterans feel a sense of security and connection and mission in the civilian world, as they did on active duty. Better employment opportunities, meaningful career trajectories, education like the one student vets get here at Hillsborough Community College, which translated into greater opportunities for our vets, not just put money on the pockets of for-profit fraudulent outfits, because we got to stop that. It all matters. It especially matters how their families are treated. John Milton, the poet, wrote these lines: "They also serve who only stand and wait." Well, military families, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, they serve every single day. Tending to their specific needs and unique challenges should never be an afterthought for us. It's a national security imperative. Fulfilling our promise to our veterans and our military families, caregivers, and survivors is critical to ensuring that we not only meet our obligations, but that future generations continue to volunteer to serve. My wife, Jill, she worked on this more than about anyone. During our administration, she and Michelle Obama teamed up and started an outfit called Joining Forces, a nationwide initiative to drive concrete commitments to support service members, veterans and their families, and caregivers and survivors. To help make sure teachers are equipped to better meet the needs of military children in their classrooms and help bring down some of the barriers, because the vast majority of those kids in the school have no idea. Well, little Johnny or Mary or Jamal is worried because his mommy or daddy is stationed in a foreign land. It makes it so much harder for military spouses to find good jobs and build their careers. We have to change it, and we're working on that. Working with leaders like Lauren Weiner, hiring our heroes, and military spouses employment program. For example, making it easy to carry your professional credentials with you from one state to another when your spouse moves. Harris-Biden administration is going to relaunch that effort and keep pushing further to make it easier for military spouses and veterans to find meaningful careers, to ensure teachers know how to support military children in their classrooms, and to improve support for caregivers and survivors so much more than we do now. This isn't a theoretical commitment. It's personal. The year that my son Bo deployed to Iraq with his National Guard unit, that's when Jill and I learned what it really means to be part of a military family. You end up praying every night and every morning for the safety of your child far from home in the middle of a war zone, facing unknown dangers. Every family gathering, they're missed. Every time their children ask why mommy or daddy isn't there to tuck them in, it hurts. These are the challenges most Americans never have to face. These are the women and men, their families. They're the absolute best that our country has to offer. They're the backbone of America. And some of the most meaningful moments of my vice presidency of those 8 years was in Thanksgiving. We'd host a Thanksgiving meal for the wounded veterans at the vice presidential residence. We spend every Christmas Day visiting the patients at Walter Reed Hospital. I spent time with our wounded warriors in trauma centers all across the country and around the world. And you know what the message I often heard when I walk in and say, soldier, sailor, Marine, what can I do for you? Whether they have their amputees or not, their arms not, they try to pull themselves up and try to salute. They say, yes, sir. I want to go back to my unit. Can you get me back to my unit? Does that sound like the heart and the grit and patriotism of a sucker or a loser? Sounds like heroism to me. Sounds like what patriotism is all about. Our military is the greatest fighting force in the history of the world, and that's not hyperbole. It's the God's truth. It deserves a commander-in-chief who respects their sacrifice, understands their service, and will never betray the values they defend. They deserve better than goes on now with their commander-in-chief. And if I have the honor of ever serving as the next commander-in-chief, I want every single member of the armed forces, our veterans, their families, their caregivers, and their survivors to know I will never treat you with anything other than the honor and respect and dignity you deserve. I'll always have your back, like you've had our back, the country's back. Thank you all. May God protect our troops. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Biden, for your compelling remarks. Thank you to Hillsborough Community College for hosting this event, and thank you to the viewers around the country who are watching today. I have the great honor of being not only a participant, but a moderator for today's events. My name is Lauren Weiner, and I'm the CEO of WWC Global. In 2004, my husband received military orders to Naples, Italy. As I prepared for our adventure, I soon realized that moving would bring a myriad of unexpected career challenges in particular. There was a formal policy on base that prohibited local military spouses from applying for professional level jobs. I had come from the White House and realized quickly that my career was at a total standstill. Fast forward 16 years, and not only have we created jobs for almost 300 military spouses and veterans, many of whom have moved with the military and with WWC Global many times, but we are also one of the largest women-owned small businesses here in the Tampa Bay area and the second largest privately held government contracting firm in the region. WWC Global is proud to have won the largest government contract award to a woman-owned business in U.S. Special Operations Command history here in Tampa.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All of this because me, my co-founder Donna Honeycutt, and so many other talented professional military spouses wanted to obtain meaningful employment in Naples, Italy so many years ago. We realized that much as we may want to, WWC could not hire all of the talented military spouses around the world, although we're still trying. In 2010, we launched a nonprofit called In Gear Career, now part of the Hiring Our Heroes program, to give back to this incredible population that had helped us grow. We also started Homefront Rising, an annual training program to help military spouses get engaged in the political process across the political spectrum. Military spouses are 4 times more likely to be unemployed or underemployed than their civilian counterparts, a 24% unemployment rate pre-COVID. This is a staggering number. But hiring military spouses isn't simply the patriotic or right thing to do. Hiring military spouses is good for our economy, it's good for individual businesses, and it's good for our force readiness. Military spouse employment, done right, impacts all of the other issues that we'll talk about here today. Mental health, transition, quality of life, all get better when military spouses are afforded the opportunity to contribute their intellect, ingenuity, and professional background to our communities. Mr. Vice President, thank you for what you and Dr. Biden have done for all military families. The Joining Forces Initiative profoundly impacted efforts around military spouse employment and other military family issues. Thank you for inviting us here today.
Thank you for what your company has done. Look, you all know this because you're veterans and many of you have spouses, if not all of you. I don't want to presume anything, but the fact is that, you know, one of the things that I found particularly difficult when watching what happened during the heavy deployments back in Iraq and Afghanistan before I was able to get permission to bring home 150,000 troops was that a significant portion of those troops were either reservist or National Guard. And they did not have the camaraderie of, if they stayed back on the base, at least with other people being in the same circumstance. And what I found was, as we traveled around the world and around the country, is that the lack of a sense of being understood what's happening, just being able to know that somebody else knows what you're going through, that sense of loss, that even if everything's fine, even if your husband or wife is in good physical shape and safe or they're ever deployed. But this idea that, you know, you're still, every night, you're taking care of the homework by yourself, or you're the only one being able to go to the school play, or you're the only one there, you know, for the birthday and no one's there. I mean, it does impact on family solidarity. It does impact on a sense of community, which you have. And my wife was part of an organization in Delaware called Boots on the Ground. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all. But what that was, and just in my small state of Delaware, and if I'm taking too much time, tell me because I'll stop. But what I found was that I remember my daughter-in-law calling the first snowstorm after Bo was deployed, and she said, "Nana, somebody's out there shoveling the driveway." This was up until there was a snowstorm. Shoveling the driveway. And I didn't call them. They left a note saying, "Thanks for the service. Thanks for your service." Or things like when someone's deployed and you're off base, even when you're on base, but you're off base, find yourself in a situation you have to show up for a mammogram, or you follow up on on something having to do with a health problem. Who takes care of the kids? I mean, what happens? Well, they started this whole thing in Delaware where people would show up. People would just volunteer. They'd give phone numbers and say, I'll be there, and show up. And the only reason I'm bothering to say it is that you know it, but I want the people to understand it. It does help with the psychological help, the sense of community. You didn't volunteer to serve, all of you, to get thanked. You volunteered to serve because that's who you are. You're not used to saying, well, thank me, I did something special. But it matters when you know people know what you've done and they're just generically supportive of what you did, respect you for it. So I think it's a big deal what you've done, and it's a major part of what Jill is already, God willing, if we're elected, starting, and she'll be calling you, not a joke.
I'm always happy to take her calls, sir.
To begin and reignite, joining forces again that she and Michelle had done. So, but thank you.
That would be amazing. Thank you. Next, we've got Deshaun Hines, who's going to speak to us as well.
Thanks, Lauren. I appreciate it. Yes, sir. It's
By
an
the
honor
way,
to
when
meet
my
you.
son got promoted to major and got the Bronze Star, I said, "Congratulations, you're now a field grade officer." He said, "Dad, I know who runs the military, sergeants." So, who the field grade officers are. But anyway, so especially the Marine Corps.
Yes, sir. It's an honor. I know you hear that a lot, but I really truly mean that. Again, my name is Deshaun Hines. I served in the United States Marine Corps, and after the Marine Corps, I decided to come here to Hillsborough Community College and get my associate's degree, and I went on to the University of Tampa to get my bachelor's degree. So I've been around education ever since I got out of the military. Luckily, they found that I was great with veterans, so that's why I decided to come here and work with them. As an academic advisor, the veterans education is a big part of my life now, and I think that our current VA education system is great, but one of the fears that I have is that they may not be keeping up with the times and that they may fall behind in regards to evolving with veterans. As you probably know, there's a lot of veteran-owned businesses now, and that's because we have great entrepreneurship programs that are starting to come out of colleges.
That's right.
Such as the one we have here at Hillsborough Community College, ran by Dr. Andy Gold and Beth Curley, to where they can have a veteran go from idea to actually starting and making sales in just 4 months. One of the concerns I have is after they have their company, they may not, a lot of them don't come back to finish their education, and their VA GI Bill just sits there. And, I was, one of the things that we had mentioned was if there was a way that we can possibly get it to where they can maybe use the benefits that they're not going to be using for education to fund their business if they don't come back to use it. So I was wondering if you, in essence, were thinking about that or about the VA education. Another issue was, which you had touched on in your speech, was veteran suicide. As you know, we've all heard the term the 22, and it hit home personally with me where I had a young Marine named Frank Smets who went to a VA hospital who was already getting assistance with with health care and with mental illness, and told them that he was going to leave and commit suicide if they didn't help him, and unfortunately he didn't. He walked out and ended up committing suicide. So I know a lot of people talk about doing something or stopping it, but it seems like it's still a big issue, and so I appreciate what you have said and how you're going to take action behind trying to stop this pandemic. So
well, look, there's a couple things, and again, tell me if I'm telling you more than you want to hear, okay? Because I know you all know all of this. But first of all, one of the things we're finding is that I used to have a friend who was a great basketball player years and years ago, back in the days when Providence College had those great teams, and Reardon and Walker, the all-pros, ended up being all-pros, were on that team if you're a basketball fan. And his name was Pete, and Pete was not that interested in academics, but he was a smart guy. And he used to have an expression. He'd say, you got to know how to know. You've got to know how to know. I can take you into the Library of Congress, and if you don't know how to read the card catalog using the computer, it's of very little value to you, all those thousands and thousands of books. Well, I find the same thing, and it didn't start off in the context of veterans, but I found the same thing with entrepreneurs. There's an awful lot of entrepreneurs, and you see what's happened. Well, I won't go into that, but awful lot of entrepreneurs, and it started off dealing with minority entrepreneurs who, given the opportunity, are as successful as any other group of entrepreneurs. That's why Barack and I started this program for giving money to state small business associations that they could then fund and bring outside the federal government, attract private funding to help people get started. Well, what I was amazed about when I read about your program down here is you provide the kind of help that teach people how to know. They may not know that they need this particular accountant, or they may not know how to get in contact with a lawyer to get the documents that are needed to be done. They may not know the detail because most of the big banks don't like lending to small operators. And so what you've done here is that you, in fact, have provided for these young entrepreneurs and these military entrepreneurs. You've sort of shown them the way. I don't mean take them by the hand and say, come on now. They've got great ideas, but they don't know the system well enough. Their idea is as good as anybody else's idea. And if they get the chance to get the infrastructure set up to be able to start whatever that entrepreneurial effort is, they can do very well. But they don't know how. And that's what I was so impressed about what Hillsborough does here, or you all do here. What I don't know, and I'll be very blunt with you, because it didn't occur to me until we set up coming down here and I learned about the program. I don't know how we can move, and I think it's a good idea. If they drop out of school to run that business, can they use those fundings to promote their business, to get their business up and going? Can they use that funding that they'd ordinarily, is that what you're asking me?
Yes, sir, in essence, so that if they can be able to get like a lump sum of that, of course, not the full amount that it would be over the course of 4 years, but be able to,
And the answer is, the service of these young women and men is not over, but we need their talent and leadership and their experience. But so, from 9/11, the Protect Post 9/11 and Forever GI Bill benefits, we got to, on the one hand, crack down on the fraud of the for-profit outfits out there that are trying to take advantage, and figure out how these vets can get access to training and placement, but also can they use it for their business? I have to give you an honest answer. I've not thought of it, and I promise you I'll pursue it, and I'll get back to you and tell you whether or not mechanically that can be done, or is it better to go straight to what I already have set up, the small business enterprise proposal. For example, the $1.5 billion we put aside for entrepreneurial encouragement brought $30 billion from the private sector. My proposal is to raise that to a $15 billion. This goes to the states now. A $15 billion SBA, small to states. That's likely to build, and they be somewhere between close to $150 billion off the sidelines. That may be the better way to do it and still preserve the ability to come back and finish that degree, because no matter what is said, even in your entrepreneurial business, you can still at night make sense to complete the degree. But I don't know the answer. I've never thought of it before, I must tell you, about using VA benefits to provide for the entrepreneurial enterprise you have underway. And if it's, I forget what the tuition here is, it's actually quite low here compared to other other community colleges. But would you be able to use that? Now, the other complication I must tell you is if I'm elected, I promise you that we're going to make sure, and there's the votes to do it, to provide for free community college for anybody who qualifies across the board. So there would be the question is, how would that work? You follow me? So I promise I'll have my guys actually the woman who runs this get in touch with you, and we'll see if I can work something out, and I'll get back to all of you as to what my position is. But I think it may be better to go directly through the existing program than to do it that way, but I'll look at it.
Deshaun,
More-
you guys are doing amazing work here, and I see it in the entrepreneurial infrastructure here in Tampa, here in Hillsborough County, and across the state. You guys are doing amazing stuff, so thank you.
But it really is amazing. I mean, you just have to know. You just have to know how, like little things, like how do I go about getting a license for this? Where do I go do this? You have the idea. That doesn't in any way undercut your new idea on IT or your new idea on whatever. But how you get there? Point me. Tell me what I need to do to get it done. I was impressed.
Next, we've
thank
got
you, sir.
Elena McCullough to speak.
Hello.
Hello, Lieutenant. How are you?
Yes. So I wrote a little story to tell you about my military career. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic. When I was 16, my family sent me to live with my aunt and uncles in California, and I had the opportunity to have a better life. On the week of my 18th birthday, I joined the United States Coast Guard, and I served for 24 years. I started as enlisted, and I did 14 years as enlisted, and then I became a lieutenant, and I kept serving in my country. The highlights of my careers are a liaison major interdiction operation in the Caribbean and maritime efforts in the WTO in Miami. I was very proud of my military career. But I have one issue that I have been talking to a lot of people, and they're very concerned about it, and it's Social Security. It's crucial. It's a crucial program for millions of hardworking Americans, including veterans. Florida is home of the second most military retirees in the country. We have contributed to Social Security our entire lives, and with the expectation that we will retire, and if we become disabled, Social Security will be there for us. But now President Trump is threatening to defund Social Security by cutting the payroll tax. So many retired veterans depend on Social Security. Part of the reason that's why we're supporting you, because you will protect Social Security. And I can't imagine an alternative. That's why we are working so hard to make sure that we have you as our president.
This is both simple and complicated. Number one, you all know the way the Social Security system's been funded because you've been paying into it your whole lives. And it's essentially 6.5% of your salary, and your employer pays 6.5%. And that's how the Social Security system is funded. It's a little more complicated, but that's the essence of it. What the president what we did, by the way, when Barack and I got into office, the President Barack Obama and I got in office, is that we inherited the most significant recession short of a depression in American history. And so we decided we had to do things to spur the economy and have economic growth. One of the things we did was to get money immediately into the hands of folks who had a job still and a paycheck by deferring their Social Security payment. But we had written into the law a firm commitment that the government would, when the crisis was done, would make up the entirety of that so there'd be no diminishment of the amount of money in the fund to be able to pay for this. Now, the president, I don't want to sound, well, I'll just say it. The president has focused on the reason why the COVID crisis has been so bad. He has focused only on making sure the stock market stays up and to make sure it doesn't decline, because then it looks bad and the economy begins to droop for the very people that he most represents. And so one of the ways, but the Congress has passed legislation to provide for significant help for working families so that they would be able to, for example, have the ability to not be able to be thrown out of their apartments, and the government would pay for that until the recession is over if they didn't have the money. Or there's 20 million people in America, an awful lot of Latinos here as well in this state, because they have 50% of Latinos own homes. They find themselves in a position where 20 million Americans are on the verge of having to worry they'll be foreclosed on because they can't pay their mortgage payment. And all that money is in this act that's been passed in the Senate and the House, with some Republican support and some Republicans supporting in the Senate. But Mitch McConnell, the senator from Kentucky, who's the majority leader, won't bring it up to be voted on. And the president is unwilling to, figuratively and literally speaking, get off his golf course and out of a sand trap and call a meeting in the Oval Office, for real. Have you ever heard of a time in a crisis like this, the president has not called together the factions in the Senate and the House to come and try to settle something that's this consequential? I mean, for real. Hadn't done it. But, so he's trying to figure out ways in which he can, in fact, I'm sorry for the explanation, but I think it's important to know the context, whereby he can say those people who still have a job, even though you have over 30 million people receiving unemployment now and about to, that's about to dry up too, is that those who get a paycheck will find they get their 6.5% they were taking out of the paycheck in their paycheck. So it looks like they're going to get a pay raise. They'll have more money to spend, which is not a bad idea theoretically. But he said he wanted to make sure that the employer and employee stop paying into the system, because that would give them more cash available to deal with their issues. But the problem is, the actuary at Social Security, the professional, said if they do that, within 3 years, the system will be totally bankrupt. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars here that would have to be made up. How could you, so all the things you paid into would be gone. So the president's now saying that he's just going to defer that being done, and between now and after the election, so I guess it's February 1st or something, he's going to defer and say, you don't have to pay for that period of time your tax for Social Security and Medicare. The problem is, it's required that the day after that exemption runs out, you got to make it all up. So if the fourth quarter of this year, you don't pay, no one pays into the Social Security Trust Fund, all that money has to be paid up in the Social Security Trust Fund in the first quarter of next year. So what people don't know, particularly the military is not going to know, on your military pay, you're going to have to come up with in the next quarter twice the amount of money that was taken out of your paycheck before. You with me? Now, I doubt whether most people are going to take that money and be able to put it away and save it because they have such urgent needs. And so it's going to be chaos. Now, a number of employers, and our moderator may know this, a number of employers are saying, we're not going to withhold it. We're going to keep paying in because we don't want to get hit with a 400,000 or 200 or a million, whatever, how big the company is, bill come next quarter. You with me? But this is all about, I'm making an assumption here, I can't, but it seems as though it makes no fiscal sense. It seems to be all about trying to make it look like he's doing something to help people in the middle of the COVID crisis when unemployment continues to go up and when you have so many people out of work now. I think there's 16 million is that have nothing at all. And to make it look like we're actually helping some people that are in that struggling area to middle class area. It'll put more money in their pocket now and they say, oh God, he's doing something to help me. It's like the one thing he wants passed again out of this next round that they're still stalled on is he wants to be able to send that $1,200 check out per person, because he literally signs it. It has his name on it. He doesn't want to do anything else. He doesn't want to help state and localities in terms of running their deficits, dealing with them. I'll end by saying the reason I know a little about this is when we hit the recession, President Obama asked me to see if I could convince my Republican friends to join us in what turned out to be an $800 billion recovery package that would be distributed within 18 months, and so that, in fact, we wouldn't go into a depression. Even outfits like the Heritage Foundation, conservative think tanks, acknowledged it kept us from going over the cliff. And part of it was he gave me authority to run it. I was able to provide $140 billion over that 18 months to state and local governments, because the state government has to balance their budget. If you're the mayor of this city, you have to have a balanced budget. You can't run a deficit. And when you're running a deficit, it means you lay off school teachers. You lay off the fire department, or not the whole department. You lay off firefighters. You lay off police officers. You lay off first responders. You lay off doctors in the public hospitals, et cetera. And so he's refusing to do that. And the consequence, he has to demonstrate he's going to get something out there. You with me? And I think that's what this is about. I just wish, and I really mean this, I wish he would, in fact, just say, we're going to call a meeting in the White House, and we're going to stay here till we get a deal done, Democrats and Republicans. Now, apparently there's a lot of Republicans who are willing to get a deal, but apparently there's 20 Republicans, very conservative members, who say they don't want to spend any more money. And so that's the hard part, getting the majority leaders in a spot that he can't. I'm talking too much specificity here, but I want you to understand what's not happening. There's answers. The House has already passed this legislation to make sure that you still get your Social Security, make sure Medicare is expanded. Like in this state, there's not expanded Medicaid. Well, guess what? You know, you got a lot of people losing their health insurance. And every other state out there, not every other, but most other states, under the Affordable Care Act, the federal government will pay 100% of the money for Medicaid, which takes care of the poor, and then after several years pay 90%. But a lot of Republican governors don't like Medicare and Medicaid and don't think the government should do it, so they don't want to take on that responsibility for the 10% down the road. So it's all caught up in that. I hope that explains it, but I think it's a big mistake, and I think that we should, at least if the president's done this, which I think is a very bad idea, he should be honest with the public and say, but you're going to have to pay this back in the next quarter. So if you're an E5 and you're out there trying to keep your family, you know, going here, and you're paid, I mean, you're still in the military, but you're home-based, you got to know that, God, that's a little bit more money every month, every paycheck from the military, but I'm going to have to double it going back. I'm sorry it takes so long, but I think it's important for people to understand exactly what's going on.
Thank you, sir. That was extremely comprehensive and extremely helpful.
I'll be less comprehensive. I'm sorry. I feel very passionate about this stuff. Maybe it's because I come from a family that you know, where Dad didn't have a job and we had to move, and you know, and you figure it's about the next meal on the table. I mean, it's, you know. Yeah.
Well, now I'm going to turn to Reverend Dr. Glenn Dames.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Vice President, for being here today. I'm the Reverend Dr. Glenn B. Dames, Jr. I am the senior pastor of the Allen Temple AME Church here in Tampa, and also a U.S. Army veteran. I'm excited to have you here today, and more excited to do everything I can to make sure you get elected to be the next president of the United States of America.
Just pray a heck of a lot.
Mr. Vice President, I want to first say that your son, Bo's memory is still etched in our memory, and he was indeed no sucker or loser. He was the epitome of bravery and sacrifice. And to this day, we still honor his memory.
Thank you.
And his sacrifice to our country and to his community. Mr. Vice President, when I was in the Army, I served as a mortuary affairs specialist at Fort Lee, Virginia, and I had the wonderful opportunity to serve at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed Hospital, where I got an opportunity to see firsthand the disparities, unfortunately, of African-American veterans.
Yep.
That's one of the things that is passionate to me, is the disparities that exist in federal medicine, especially in the VA system when it comes to African-American vets. We fight so hard for things that should rightfully be ours, and we're always the first to volunteer to serve our country and community. And so I'm hoping that you can put together a plan, your team can put together a plan to help bridge that gap, that disparity with African-American veterans who have served their country honorably and deserve benefits. To that point, I am currently working with a veteran who's a member of my congregation. His name is Mr. David Hicks. He has been retired for 28 years from the United States Air Force, a Vietnam veteran. Excuse me, because I get emotional. A Vietnam veteran, Agent Orange, and to this day, he is still fighting for benefits. 28 years after his retirement, after serving his country honorably, he is still fighting for benefits. And he and his spouse are both disabled. They have a son that's taking care of the both of them, and they cannot get the benefits they need to make their ends meet. I think that's abhorrent, and I hope that as president, you can do something to help expedite, bridge the gap, and help our, especially our African-American veterans get the much needed care that they deserve from the VA system. And then secondly, is veteran retooling. With all the layoffs that COVID-19 has caused, we found a lot of our veterans are having to look for reemployment. And as a result, Mr. Vice President, they need desperately to be retooled. And there's not very many VA programs that can help them retool in this particular process. And I'm hoping, Mr. Vice President, that you can and your team can put together something to help our veterans retool in today's economy.
Well, look, first of all, your parishioner is, congregant is not alone. Doesn't make it any easier. When you're in that situation, you're alone. It's you, okay? Number one. Number two, I see two pieces to what you're talking about here. The first piece is the gentleman you referenced, who's been out 28 years, is still fighting for access to service and his medical needs being cared for, having been exposed to Agent Orange. I was the original co-sponsor a long, long time ago. I got to the Senate when I was 29 years old, 30 years old. And right from the beginning, a generation where the whole fight was about Agent Orange. And some of you, none of you women are old enough, but a few of you men may be old enough to remember, that the argument was that in order to be able to get veterans benefits, whatever ones are related to illness, what you had to be able to show is a direct causal relationship to that immune disease you may have and been exposed to Agent Orange, which science was not able to absolutely confirm precisely whatever whether it was a brain injury or you got an autoimmune disease or whatever, they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was caused by Agent Orange. Therefore, all these folks were left out. I started with some others, including eventually with a great friend, John McCain, later on. But this program to say, all you have to do is show that you were, in fact, exposed to Agent Orange. It fell on top of your head and millions of tons of it dropped. And whatever illness you have that is inexplicable relating to your immune system, tumors, etc., would be presumed to be a consequence of the exposure. So you shifted the burden from the individual soldier or sailor or Marine or Coast Guardsman to the military, to the government, to say, no, we have to pay for that, we have to provide the services, we have to provide all the backup, we have to provide the disability payments because you were exposed. Took a long time to get it done. And you may remember when we finally, with Barack, even though he wasn't around for that war, he strongly supported it, and we increased that legislation so there was a guarantee, basically. It also put the VA in real trouble, quite frankly, because it all of a sudden you had thousands of veterans now eligible for the treatment of the VA. You with me? But we finally worked our way through that. That's why I got to the point where one of the things you may remember, if you're from the Iraq War and the Afghan War, is an awful lot of our military. We have more amputees per capita in these wars than we had since the Civil War. And why? Because of IEDs, improvised devices buried in the ground and going by with a Humvee, not a just going by with a vehicle and getting blown up. And so many were dying. But what happened was there was an effort, there was a recommendation by some in the military that we could do, an up-armored MRAP could save a lot of lives, but they're very expensive. And the military wanted to spend the money on other needs they saw. But I became how can I say it politely, a royal pain in the neck to everybody on the Senate floor. And I constantly went to the floor saying that we will be responsible for these deaths and amputations if we don't act. We have something that can fundamentally change the effects on a soldier or a sailor or anyone who's blown up an IED with these new vehicles. And they've saved thousands of lives in the meantime. But what happened was, as the president says, they're just headaches, but traumatic brain injury is real. It causes significant physical consequences and psychological consequences as well. And so what was happening, I wanted to make sure we didn't go through another period like we did in that fight to finally get coverage for people exposed to Agent Orange after all those years. I didn't want to have to go back and have a debate, how do we make up for it? So now, if in fact you can demonstrate you have traumatic brain injury, you have a brain injury problem, and you were in an area of concussion, it's assumed it's because of that concussion. You don't have to go back and prove, no, I was there on this day, I was 300 yards from that IED, and this happened, and I got to prove, and I got a doctor to say that's precisely why this injury occurred in my, And so we wouldn't have to go through that again. But it takes me to the larger question you have. What about dealing with all the things that African Americans, military members or veterans, what about the fact that they get left behind? And they do for several reasons. Number one, if you are an African American, whether it's COVID on a military base or you're off base and you're retired, you're a veteran, COVID, you are 4 times as likely to come down with COVID and 3 times as likely to die if you're white. That's because a lot of preconditions that exist. If you are Hispanic or Latino, the ratio is 2 to 1 and 3 to 1, but it's still much higher because of other exposures that exist and the lack of ability to be in circumstances where your physical health has been able to be taken care of because you've had the insurance and the like for preventive stuff early on. So a lot of it has to do with everything from having diabetes to other problems that are complicated. That's why you see so many people, white and black and Hispanic and Asian Americans, dying because of pre-existing conditions that are out there. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to focus on those veterans, and you're talking about veterans now, African Americans, who have been had that exposure to whether it's COVID and or anything else, because they're in a position where they're more likely to be susceptible. But one of the pieces of that is that if you are an African American veteran, the likelihood, although we've tried incredibly hard in our administration and we significantly cut down the rate of unemployment of vets getting out when of the African Americans, is that old thing, is to quote, Barack, there's still systemic racism. If your name is Joe and I apply for the job and you have the same qualifications I have and your name is Jamal, I'm likely to get the job. It's just a fact of life. And so what we're not doing enough of is bringing in veterans, and you probably have it right here in your programs here at school. That seems to me you probably are emphasizing it and dealing with it. But the ability to, again, know how to know, the ability to find jobs and connect people with jobs. That's what we spend a lot of time doing in our administration, providing significant number of government jobs in the federal government. Because if you could take care, if you were a quartermaster, you can sure in hell take care of running a department store thing, where in the second floor of the ladies department or whatever, you know what I mean? If you have been responsible for a couple $2 billion worth of tanks, you can sure handle a distributing capacity for I don't know, FedEx, you can do it. And so trying to connect the veteran retirement with helping them understand what their training in the military most qualifies them to be part of, to know where to start looking, to know where to try to connect people. And that's part of what I think the VA has to do more of, not the health side of it, but the connection side. Again, our moderator, you probably do that already in your business. But people don't realize that I have this skill. That skill may not work very well for me to go in and be a salesperson, but it may work very well for me to be a warehouse manager. It may be a place, you understand what I'm saying? And so, Doc, what we ought to do is talk a little bit about, and I'll get my people on the line with you, we may be able to be specifically helpful, and you may as well from here, specifically helpful in the kinds of things that are already available that people don't know are available. You follow me? But explicitly, the more helpful, and by the way, white guys with high school educations come out and they're having the same kinds of problems, and not as bad. Not as bad. It's just worse for minorities. And so we gotta, and I'm happy to go through with you in some more detail what kinds of initiatives are available so you can help. For example, if I were still a senator, if I were still, well, I can do it anyway. You ought to get us in touch with your individual you're talking about and see if we can do a little bit of casework here and guide a little bit. But larger than that, that's one person. Larger than that, we have to expand the access to these programs that connect a veteran with their most likely area of employment. They may say they want to go and, I don't know, do whatever, but it may not be their skill that they acquired in the military may not in any way enhance that piece. Am I making sense? Okay. All right, sorry.
And there are some great.
You got to ask me some easy questions here. I mean,
I don't think anyone's going to ask you any easy questions, sir. There are some great programs out there, both government but also nonprofit, that are doing that, and it's a good thing because we are getting better. The next person that we have is Elliot Steele.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice President Biden. My name is Elliot Steele. I'm a veteran, and both my parents were veterans. My wife and I are founders of Vincent House, Florida's first internationally accredited clubhouse for people with a mental illness. As we all clearly know, if someone experiences an injury, heart attack, or prosthesis, they go through physical therapy to learn to walk on that uneven sidewalk, get their stamina, self-esteem, and self-confidence back, and then they're successful at returning to work and having a purpose in life. Before Vincent House, veterans and other people with mental illnesses in Florida did not have that opportunity. Vincent House is a clean, safe, restorative community that is built upon respect and dignity, something people with a mental illness rarely experience. In addition to the opportunity to practice work, participants, called members, can find a purpose in life through voluntary work running the clubhouse and relationships developed with staff and other members. As a veteran myself, I wanted to ensure veterans were included from the beginning almost 18 years ago. We had veterans from Bay Pines VA visit us weekly and participate in our work order day. Many became members, and membership is for life. Since inception, our members have collectively earned over $7.5 million working real jobs in the community. Many of these members were written off by their doctors, Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, their families, and sometimes themselves as unemployable. Even more importantly, they have broken that cycle of perpetual patient. Vincent House has grown into 2 additional counties, with the most recent one in Pasco County having their ribbon cutting tomorrow. Additionally, there are now 11 clubhouses in the state of Florida. There are over 300 international clubhouses in more than 30 countries. 200 of them are in the United States. My goal when you become president is to assist your team in providing increased mental health funding to offer veterans and other people with mental illnesses the opportunity to become a member in a clubhouse in their own community. Just a short example of one of our many veteran members. A Vietnam vet decided to go back to school. He got his master's with honors. He's a certified addictions counselor. Today, he does a weekly Double Trouble program for our members. And Double Trouble is a program, a 12-step program for people with mental illnesses and addictions. So he's giving back to the clubhouse. And I thank you for this opportunity to share with you Vincent House.
Well, thank you. Look, as my mother would say, you're here, you're doing God's work, kid. They really are. You know, we've learned an awful lot in the last decade about a lot of things relating to health and well-being. One of them we learned is that the double addiction of mental health and substance addiction. We always thought that physical addiction to a substance caused mental illness. Not so, other way around. And so we found that out now, and that's why one of the things, this is not what you asked for, I'm just going to make the point of it though. One of the things that we have to do is, speaking of schooling, we used to, in our public school system, have school psychologists in the school, social workers, and school nurses. But now we only have one school psychologist for every 1,507 kids. Even though we now know that mental problems. It starts off with anxieties that exist. In fact, generate drug addiction. And so by putting psychologists back in the school system, we can identify early an entire generation that is dealing with serious uncertainty about their state of security. For example, the generation between 7 years old and 17 years old is more at risk than any generation in the history of the United States in terms of anxiety. Why? Because they see mom and dad, splitting. They see this crazy thing of everybody's home. There's increased domestic violence because people are staying alone. There's increased child abuse. There's increased whole range of things. And so one of the ways to get ahead of this, so there's not as many Vincent houses are going to be needed 20 years from now, is catch this early to keep kids in track. And we find out when you have that occur, and you put